Welcome to the deep dive where we get into the weeds on some pretty important topics.
That we do.
And today we're diving deep into ADP 313. That's the Army's Doctrine on Information.
Right.
Specifically, Chapter 7, Attack.
It's a critical chapter.
It really is, especially for us in the Army. As soldiers, we need to own the information environment just like we own the physical battlefield.
Couldn't agree more. It's a different world out there now. I mean, it used to be all about boots on the ground, right? Securing a location. But ADP 313 really drives home the point that the information environment, it's just as critical.
Like Sun Tzu said, fighting with a large army under your command is no wise different from fighting with a small one. It is merely a question of instituting signs and signals.
I love that quote.
Me too, but what does that even mean, right? And in today's world with cyber warfare and all this tech.
Well, that quote from Sun Tzu, it perfectly illustrates the potential of information warfare to manipulate an enemy's perception of reality. Like, imagine making an enemy commander think they're facing a much larger force than they actually are.
Just through misinformation.
Exactly. That's the power of understanding and utilizing the information environment.
So it's about getting inside their ODA loop.
Yeah.
Disrupting their ability to observe, orient, decide, and act.
Precisely. You disrupt that loop, you throw their whole game off. Every decision an enemy makes relies on information, right? If we control that flow, manipulate it, disrupt it, we gain a significant advantage.
And that brings us to the two core tasks of information attack that are outlined in ADP 313. Degrading enemy command and control and affecting their information warfare capabilities. Can you break those down a little bit further?
Sure. So when we talk about degrading command and control, C2, it's about more than just taking out their radios or their comm systems. Think about it. It's about disrupting the entire decision-making process.
So paint us a picture.
Okay, imagine an enemy brigade is getting ready to launch an attack, right? Now, using electronic warfare, cyber attacks, maybe even some well-placed misinformation, we could disrupt their communications, feed them false intel about, let's say, our troop movements.
Essentially paralyze their ability to coordinate.
Wow.
So it's like a multi-pronged approach. You're using all these different tools to create chaos. What about affecting their information warfare capabilities? What does that look like?
So that's where we're fighting back against enemy propaganda, disinformation campaigns, their attempts to control the narrative. Let's say an adversary is spreading lies about our operations to try and turn the local population against us. We can counter that with verifiable facts, expose the source of the disinformation, and work to keep the community on our side.
So it's being proactive, not letting them control the narrative.
Exactly. And ADP 313 gives us a great framework for thinking about the tools we have, the different ways we can launch these information attacks.
It's like a toolbox, right? You got your hammer, your screwdriver, each with a specific purpose. What are some of the tools in our information attack toolbox?
Well, the doctrine outlines 4 key methods: physical destruction, electromagnetic attack, cyberspace operations, and space operations. Each one has its own strengths, its weaknesses, and when to use them, well, that depends on the situation.
Let's take a closer look at each one, starting with physical destruction. That sounds pretty straightforward, right? You take out the enemy's communication infrastructure?
It can be that direct, yeah. Let's say we need to disrupt enemy comms in a remote outpost. We could take out a key radio tower, maybe a satellite dish with, say, a well-placed airstrike. That could effectively cut them off from their command.
So that's the sledgehammer. What about something a little more precise, like an electromagnetic attack?
Electromagnetic attack, or EA, that's all about denying the enemy's use of the electromagnetic spectrum, jamming their radio signals, messing with their radar, even using directed energy weapons to fry their electronics.
Okay, so let's say we're trying to support a friendly unit that's pinned down by enemy fire. Could we use EA to jam the enemy's comms, buy our guys some time?
Exactly. And the technology is always evolving, right? The capabilities of EA, they're only going to become more sophisticated. But it's also about understanding the electromagnetic environment, the different frequencies, terrain, even the weather. All that can impact how effective EA is.
Right, tool for the job.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, cyberspace operations, that seems like the most, sophisticated, maybe even game-changing option in today's world.
Oh, the potential there is enormous. Disrupting enemy networks, spreading information, even influencing perceptions online. Instead of blowing up a bridge, imagine infiltrating their systems and subtly manipulating their logistics data.
Like sending their supply convoy into an ambush.
You got it.
That's some next-level stuff. But with great power comes great responsibility, right?
Absolutely. Cyber ops are incredibly complex. They take a ton of planning, coordination, and there's always the potential for things to, well, not go as planned.
Unintended consequences.
Exactly.
And we can't forget about space. Space operations are, well, it's not just about satellites anymore, is it?
No, not at all. Space is becoming more contested every day. Whoever can operate effectively up there, that's going to be crucial in any future conflict. Protecting our own satellites, denying the enemy access to their space-based intelligence.
So we're talking messing with their GPS signals, blinding their spy satellites.
Potentially,
That could
yes.
be huge on a battlefield.
It could cripple a force that relies heavily on GPS, that's for sure. And that's just one example.
So those are the four main methods of information: attack, physical destruction, electromagnetic attack, cyber, and space operations. How does a commander choose which tool to use?
That's the million-dollar question, and ADP 313 goes into it in detail. One of the most critical things to consider is collateral damage,
Ah.
especially with cyber and space, Those can have some far-reaching consequences.
Right, because you could end up hurting civilians or neutral parties.
Exactly. And then there's escalation. Even a non-lethal information attack could be seen as an act of aggression, and, well,
Things could spiral.
it's a delicate balance, but that's what makes this so fascinating. It's not just about firepower. It's strategy, psychology, understanding the nuances of this new kind of warfare.
Absolutely. And speaking of nuances, we need to talk about the very real threat of disinformation. It feels like it's everywhere these days, coming at us from all sides.
It's a huge challenge, but the good news is ADP 313 addresses it head on, and it's something that, it's something that keeps me up at night, to be honest.
Yeah, it feels like you can't escape it.
Yeah.
So how do we fight back against something like that? Like, how do you fight a lie? What tools do we even have?
Well, the thing is, we can't fight fire with fire. I mean, we're the good guys, right?
Right, of course.
We don't spread disinformation ourselves.
Absolutely not. So how do we counter those narratives?
Truth. It's about getting the truth out there. And we do that by exposing the holes in their stories, by providing alternative perspectives. But they have to be backed up with evidence, and we need to amplify those voices that people trust.
Give people the tools to think critically, to sort it all out.
Exactly. We can't force anyone to believe what we want them to believe. But we can arm them with good information and let them make up their own minds.
There's that old saying, a lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to get his pants on.
And it's true.
I need to make sure the truth is ready to sprint.
I like that. That's a good one. And that's where our public affairs folks come in. MILDEC, military information support operations.
Right, using our communication channels strategically.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just about, yelling louder than the other side, is it?
No, not at all. It takes nuance. It takes strategy. We have to remember that winning this information war, it's just as important as winning on any other battlefield.
So we have to be as good at wielding information as we are at wielding weapons.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
You mentioned collateral damage and escalation earlier. Those seem like pretty heavy considerations when you're planning an information attack.
They're critical,
Yeah.
absolutely critical. And ADP 313, it stresses this, that you have to plan carefully, really identify your target, especially when you're dealing with capabilities that can have such, widespread consequences.
So it's not just picking the right tool from the toolbox. It's understanding the impact that using that tool is going to have.
That's it, exactly. That's where your intelligence gathering, your target analysis, even things like legal reviews, they all come into play. You have to be sure about what you're trying to achieve with this attack, who or what might be affected, even what the legal and ethical ramifications might be.
So this is serious business. There's a lot to consider before you launch any kind of information attack.
Oh, absolutely. It's not something you jump into blindly. And that's why these information operations, they're rarely, standalone things. They're part of a bigger picture, a larger campaign, carefully coordinated with other military operations, diplomatic efforts, maybe even economic sanctions.
So all the tools in the toolbox working together.
That's the idea. And that's a key takeaway from ADP 313. Information warfare, it's not some separate thing off in its own little corner. It is an integral part of how we fight now, and it needs to be woven into our planning and our decision-making at every level.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears a little bit. Talk about timelines. How long does it actually take to plan and execute an effective information attack?
Well, that really depends, right? I mean, a simple jamming operation, that could be done in minutes, but a complex cyber attack, that could take weeks, months even, of planning and prep.
So there's no easy answer, no one size fits all.
Right. And that's why it's so vital to really understand the different tools, the techniques, what the enemy's capable of, where they're vulnerable. The more we know about that information environment, the better we can use it to our advantage.
Which brings us back to Sun Tzu and that idea of shaping how the enemy sees the world. Can you give us some examples from the real world of how information attack has been used effectively to achieve a strategic objective?
Oh, there are tons of examples. I mean, you could go all the way back to the Trojan horse.
Talk about a deception operation.
Right. Or all the propaganda during World War II. But let's stick with something a little more recent, a little closer to home, shall we? How about the situation in Ukraine?
That's a good one, especially with how much Russia's been using information warfare.
Absolutely a textbook case study.
Right.
Shows exactly how information attack can be used to support military objectives, sow chaos, even undermine the enemy's will to fight.
So how did they do it? How did Russia use information warfare in Ukraine?
Multi-pronged approach, really. They used their state-controlled media to spread disinformation, right? Painting Ukraine as the aggressor, demonizing their government. At the same time, they were launching cyber attacks against Ukrainian infrastructure, disrupting communications, trying to create as much confusion as possible.
Propaganda, cyber attacks, it's like psychological warfare.
It is, and you know what? It was very effective, at least in the beginning. They were able to control the narrative for a while there, at least for a certain audience, and they created enough doubt and confusion within Ukraine itself to give their own forces a head start.
But Ukraine's been pretty savvy too, haven't they? Using information to their advantage.
Oh, without a doubt. They've been masters of social media, using it to counter the Russian propaganda, get their own message out, and really rally international support.
So it's a two-way street.
Always is. Both sides are constantly trying to control that narrative, trying to shape the information environment to benefit them. That's why it's so important to understand the dynamics at play here. It's not just about the tech, it's about how that information gets used to influence people, to tell a story, and ultimately to achieve a goal.
And that battle for hearts and minds, that's only going to get more and more important as we go forward.
Absolutely. We live in a world where information travels at the speed of light.
Hmm.
If you can control that information, you can control a lot more.
Which is a great point to bring it back to ADP 313. This doctrine gives us a framework for thinking about information attack.
Exactly. It gives us the tools, the concepts we need, but it's a living document. It's constantly evolving, so we have to evolve with it. Stay informed about changes, about how information warfare is changing, how the technology is changing.
Because the battlefield is changing, and our adversaries are changing with it.
They're always trying to find a new way to exploit a weakness, so we have to stay one step ahead, always adapting our tactics, our techniques, the whole playbook.
It's a game of chess.
You got it. And just like in chess, you have to know your pieces. You have to know what they can do, what they can't do. And that's what ADP 313 helps us to do in the information environment.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening.
Yeah.
It's given me at least a whole new appreciation for how complex this whole information warfare thing really is.
It's a whole new world out there.
It is. Before we wrap up, I want to make sure we touch on something else that's incredibly relevant to information attack, especially in the context of ADP 313, and that's the very real threat of disinformation.
Right, of course.
So, to be clear, we're not talking about, little white lies here. We're talking about deliberate, calculated campaigns to mislead, to manipulate, to sow chaos.
And it's everywhere. You see it online, in the news, even whispered on the streets.
So how do we as soldiers, as leaders, how do we even begin to counter something that insidious?
Well, first and foremost, we have to acknowledge it. We can't fight something if we don't even admit it's a problem.
Right. Burying our heads in the sand won't make it go away.
Exactly. We have to be aware of the threat, we have to understand how it works, and we have to be prepared to counter it.
So awareness is step one. What comes next?
Education. We need to be educating ourselves, our soldiers, about what disinformation is, how to spot it, how to avoid falling prey to it, and most importantly, how to counter it effectively.
And that education, it's not just a one-time thing, is it?
Not at all. It's got to be ongoing. We need to be constantly adapting our training, updating our materials, and staying one step ahead of the bad guys because they're not sitting still, They're constantly refining their techniques, coming up with new and innovative ways to spread their lies.
So it's a constant cat and mouse game.
In a way, yes. But it's a game we can't afford to lose.
Absolutely. And that education, it's not just about, lectures and PowerPoint presentations. It's got to be engaging. It's got to be relevant to their lives, to the work that they do every day.
Exactly. We need to be finding creative ways to reach our soldiers to make this information stick.
So practical exercises, real-world scenarios, maybe even some gamification.
All of that and more. We need to be thinking outside the box here.
And it's not just about what we teach them, it's about how we teach them.
Right, exactly. We can't just be feeding them information. We need to be teaching them how to think critically, how to question what they see and hear, and how to form their own informed opinions.
So critical thinking skills, media literacy, all of that plays a role.
Absolutely. We need to be equipping our soldiers with the tools they need to be discerning consumers of information.
So it's not just about, winning the battle against disinformation. It's about winning the war for truth.
Precisely.
So we've established that, yeah, winning that information war, that's crucial, especially in today's world.
Yeah.
For our listeners out there, the soldiers in the U.S. Army, what are some key takeaways, some things they should really remember coming out of ADP 313?
I think the biggest one, the one we can't stress enough, is that information attack, it's not just for specialized units, right? It's not just for your cyber warriors, your PSYOP folks. Every soldier needs to get this because every soldier, they have a role to play.
They're on the front lines of the information environment, too, every single one of them.
Exactly. Even if it's something as simple as, seeing a disinformation campaign on Facebook, right? Or reporting something fishy they see in their neighborhood, that could be intel, that little piece of the puzzle.
You never know what could be important.
Exactly. So stay vigilant, stay informed, be those critical thinkers. Don't believe everything you read, question everything. Where's this coming from? What's the angle here? Is this even true?
It's like they say, trust but verify. Never been more relevant than it is today.
Truth. And ADP 313, it gives us that foundation, that way to think about all this, how to move, how to operate in this kind of environment. But, and this is important, it's not static, right? This document, it's alive, it changes.
So we got to keep up.
Absolutely. Stay up to date on the doctrine, on how information warfare is evolving, what new tech is out there, because the enemy sure is.
The battlefield changes, they change with it.
They're always looking for that crack, that way in, that new way to exploit us, So we got to be one step ahead, always adapting new tactics, new techniques.
It's like that game of chess.
100%. Every move matters.
And in this game, we got to know the rules.
ADP 313. It teaches us the rules of the game. It shows us how to make the right moves.
This deep dive, this has been amazing, really eye-opening, makes you appreciate just how complex this whole information warfare thing really is. Any last words of wisdom for our listeners out there, those soldiers on the digital front lines?
Here's what I'll leave you with. In the future, those lines, the ones between the real world and the digital world, they're going to blur. Master those principles of information attack. The ones in ADP 313, that's not just about winning a battle, that's about securing our future.
Powerful stuff. The information environment, it's everyone's battlefield now, and we all have a role to play.
Well said.
This wraps up our deep dive into ADP 313. To all our listeners, thank you for being here. We hope you found this breakdown of Chapter 7 helpful, insightful, and that you're ready to tackle the ever-changing landscape of information warfare. Until next time, stay sharp out there.